This podcast and every other podcast that I make is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. They get every episode of Play, Watch, Listen early, including this episode, which was up there on time and a little bit late for everybody else just because I had some internet issues. Also, apologies about some of the audio in this episode. I think the remote setup just ate itself. But yes, if you're a fan of the show and you'd like to show some support, you can check us out on Patreon. Has anyone been playing Zelda by any chance?
I've not. I've been watching...
I think like 15 million people.
I've been watching like 10-second videos of it.
Great, okay.
Over and over again.
Curious, is there any reason you haven't played it specifically? Just too busy?
Just busy, and still playing Jedi Survivor. So I'm like a month behind the discourse at the moment. I'm on the second train that starts that game. Tell me about Zelda. I want to know about it because I've not actually read many reviews or seen many videos. Are you having a great time with it, Alanah? Or
yes, but I think I'm curious I need to both play more and to talk to people about it because it's very big. And I'm not a person who's ever really enjoyed building things. Like, I'll have fun with Lego if I'm following a specific instruction guide. And I can do Minecraft if I make a really specific plan. But the openness of Tears of the Kingdom didn't appeal to me as much before it came out. I'm having a really fun time because you can get so silly with it. But I think that's because I'm streaming it when I play it. I don't know if I'd enjoy it that much solo.
It's kind of the Destiny thing, but it's a really good chat room, potentially.
Yeah, for sure. And I've had a lot of fun watching what other people are doing with it because it's like the stuff people are making. Like, I saw someone made a paddle boat. Someone's made a mech, like that flies with like little robot.
I saw that. That was amazing.
It's incredible. Like, it's so.
Where did you land on Breath of the Wild?
I really like Breath of the Wild. I think it's incredible. Yeah.
I'm probably being ignorant here. Breath of the Wild is the same map, right? So what makes it feel bigger? Is it the verticality? Is it like the quests and the structure of it? Like what makes it feel so much bigger than Breath of the Wild?
It's vertical. It's verticality both up and down. So it's the same map except that there are islands in the sky and like a cavern underneath the ground.
Right.
So it feels massive.
It's like the Elden Ring thing of there's like an entire underworld map below the map.
You get on that elevator and you're like, oh boy. Yeah, it's pretty much that. It's I think it's also just I wasn't a huge fan of the intro sequence, but then I just saw IGN post yesterday or the day before. They were like, Zelda teaches everybody how to do the best tutorial, and I was like, oh, like maybe I have the absolute wrong read on that because I wasn't a huge fan of the tutorial. I felt like it was like very it's very long. It's like a 5-hour tutorial.
Decades of watching playtesters tells me everyone has a completely different correct way to do a tutorial, and it's
it's just very long.
Never been I guess they've got a lot of concepts to cover, especially for a broader audience who maybe aren't familiar with like other kind of crafty games.
Totally, and they do a really good job of like giving you the new ability and then putting you in a shrine that requires the ability to solve it, which is probably the best way to do that. I think that I expected the game to give you the new abilities that you have further apart is all. You get them all, or most of them, really early, like in the first 10 hours of what's probably a 150-hour experience in the long run. But yeah, otherwise been having a great time watching everybody brutally murder Koroks, which I guess is a thing everybody wanted to do because they hated them in Breath of the Wild, and I did not. Because I don't know if you know,
some truly horrific imagery.
It's brutal. If you get all of the Koroks in Breath of the Wild, you go to Hestu, who's like one of my favorite characters, and the reward for finding all the Koroks, which can take a really long time because a lot of them are hidden, you don't even know where they are, is like you get a golden pile of poop. And so, as a result of...
Sounds like an American Dad reference.
As a result of that outcome, I think people are really just torturing Koroks, and it's been a ride. I was very curious with Nintendo being as like family friendly as they are, what the meetings would have been like, where surely they knew humans would have done that. Surely they knew that was going to happen.
They probably have the data.
Yeah, like how long did it take for somebody to make a dick out of a couple of boulders and some sticks? That happened real fast. Like, I wonder what the approach to that kind of stuff is for a company like that, but it's all there.
I mean, TTP was a metric I've encountered before. Like, time to penis is like there is definitely that is a term within game development that like you can't really you there's no way they could have made a system that was penis proof.
No, and if they have, like they still censor words sometimes on Nintendo chats and usernames and stuff. If they had, it just would have stifled creativity in such a negative way. Like I'm sure that was a meeting. I'm sure that was a meeting where they were like, how much
100%.
dick should we allow? And they had to be like,
what is
all
our
of it.
Dick threshold?
All of it.
I feel like there must surely be a kind of Streisand effect to that sort of thing as well, where if you go out of your way to try to limit it, then you encourage people to find that one obscure loophole that like engages them far more than if it's way open-ended. Then the predictable subset of the population is going to do their thing and be largely ignored by everybody because there's nothing intrinsically unique or creative about it.
Yeah, it's boring. Yeah. If you make the dick interesting, everybody wants to see it.
The number of puns that I'm trying to avoid right now, the girth of ideas that are coming to mind at this very moment, it's just
if the system had this, like, if there was like dick recognition that, there was like a million ways that you could try to like build your world, and the system would kind of see through that and somehow stop you.
It's about if you want to grow creativity or show creativity.
This is what we need AI for. Dick detection.
Here's what my prediction would be is if they had a thing where like on a two-dimensional surface, you like you said, the boulders and the pile of sticks, if that was the thing that something could kind of image recognize the outline and prevent it. Dicks. Well, here's what I suspect someone would find a way to do.
That's the title of the video, please.
The thumbnail.
That's it.
That's the
everywhere I look.
Those 3D sculptures where like they look like nothing until you come to that perfect exact right angle. Someone would find a way to do that, and that would be the workaround.
You'd have to see the dick from the right angle, is what you're saying.
I guarantee you. That would be the...
How does monetization work on YouTube videos? How far into the video can you start saying the word dick every 5 minutes?
It's all over the place, and the good news is I don't care, because we don't try to make money on the show, but we do get demonetized sometimes, which is always fun. Or it's usually ads limited. I only ever tend to get completely demonetized for copyright content.
This is definitely the most problematic YouTube podcast that exists, 100%.
For sure. Yeah, it doesn't go downhill from here. No, this is it. Everyone else, Christian. Just... above the board. It's just a bunch of...
Christian is the hallmark for monetizability.
If it's good Christian content.
Interesting.
Yeah, 100%.
Interesting.
But no, I've had definitely this thing that I keep having, that I have with Lego games as well when playing Zelda, that happened to me as I got older, is I overthink puzzles all the time. And I do that with Lego games too, where I just overthink the puzzles. And it's something that I'm not sure how to turn off. Like I'll build something way more elaborate than I ever needed to solve a puzzle or solve a shrine or whatever, because I think it should be harder than it is. And it's like, I finished the water temple as a child. I wasn't even 10 and I did the water temple. And now challenge. I'm like, what? How am I supposed to do this?
Like puzzle design, the biggest challenge isn't how do you hint to the player what they should be doing. It's how do you tell the player it's okay not to do this incredibly obtuse thing. Like that's 90% of puzzle design is like giving the player permission to find the easy option. But yeah, obviously
it's hard.
As you get older as well, you're smarter, obviously. So like you're going to keep trying.
This seems odd though. Am I? I keep doing shit I don't need to.
Probably. I don't know.
I imagine working in the industry and kind of being all the more fluent in the sort of telltale, recurring, whatever that vocabulary, the sort of collective term for the vocabulary of the red barrels, all those little things that we already can identify. That becomes all the more obvious, I think, when you're actually in design discussions and things.
I remember I was playing one game where there was like worn away edges on like a wall, and I was like, well, clearly I can climb on that. So I was like jumping at it for like 5 minutes for that reason.
Yeah, that's exactly, that's 100% where I was going with that, is on Jedi Survivor, which is so platformy in its sort of main drive. I feel like that game is practically a platformer first in so many regards. And for better or worse, it had moments that I thought it was awesome and moments where I thought, like, geez, this is so elaborately, like, this is bending over so backwards to make me do these moves.
The ones that have, like, the wind. You've got...
There's wind, and you have to force pull a vine and then do a thing. And I always remember picturing the architect going, this is perfect. But But there's a few times where I got through one, and then as soon as I got to the top and I looked back, I realized there had been a way easier way to do it, and I had effectively done a thing that I suspect wasn't. It's not that I chose a harder way. I think that I brute forced something that's only barely possible and not really meant to be possible, like through just really tedious, back, like where you could kind of push off of a wall and then sort of jump back to it and do a
Why
few
do you
things
think
where
you did that rather than whatever was the intended solution?
it's what you just said.
Same thing,
I
overthinking
somehow I overthought it, or
Yeah.
I spotted what I was sure was the solution, and then only after I solved it did I see the clearly much easier path.
It's a really interesting thing to
and-
design for. Like, I'm sure I've spoken about this before, but I have trouble with some horror games now because survival horror is my favorite genre of video game. I love a horror game, but I now have a problem where I can very easily ruin something that would be scary for myself because of level design. I'll be like, oh, this room has 2 boxes. Somebody's going to break through that door and I'm going to have to hide from them behind there. And that it happens all the time. And then I didn't even realize I was doing it until I was playing with somebody who I guess hasn't played quite as many horror games, has still played a lot of games. And I was like, oh, you don't notice any of that, huh? Like, that sucks. How did I do that? And it's a tough one that you can't necessarily design for that player in mind because that's a minority.
But what's the problem with
that's
that?
the creative
Because
arms race, isn't it? You're having with
Yeah.
the audience all times, In
I
any
was literally
medium,
going to
in
make
any-
that same
yeah.
analogy. Like, what's
I'll
the
let you go.
problem of designing to the minority of players where if I design a thing that I know will get you, it must surely also then just take every other less attenuated player
I
also,
think
right?
the balance of this specific instance that I'm talking about, where it was Evil Within. I had trouble being scared by that game because of the level design. I did with Evil Within 2, funnily enough. But it would be that I think if you removed those couple of boxes or whatever, it would be too difficult for most players to evade the enemy. So it was probably something where when they were first designing it, they weren't there, and then they needed to add more obstacles so that players were able to survive or get out of that room or that level or whatever.
That is 100% how iteration on most level design works. Is you start off with these high fleeting. No, the player will get this, player will get that, and you put it in front of playtesters, and they absolutely don't. And you start putting in those guide rails and those helps.
Some of my favorite dev interviews, and this even has happened to me sometimes, has been a puzzle that they were so sure players would get, and the players didn't. So then they had to they made all lines point in that direction. Players still didn't see it. They made it sparkle. Players still didn't see it. So then they had to pull in a camera thing, where the camera will pan and zoom in on what the puzzle is, and that's the only way people got it. I even had that when I was playtesting Ragnarok, and sometimes when you do that, you for a boss fight design or whatever, will effectively do it with the designer. So they see you play it, but they don't comment until afterwards, and then they'll ask you questions. And there was something where someone was like, why didn't you do this? And I was like, I didn't see it, even though it was something that was super obvious, like a bright color or whatever, that you have to just repeatedly iterate for players who just tune things out, which is unfortunately extremely common.
There's a degree of magical thinking as well in game design. I can't remember someone tweeted this recently, but it's totally true. So much of GDC design wisdom, that is passed around game developers in interviews or in lectures or whatever, is bollocks we invented after the fact. And you often get this kind of self-repeating stuff. I think it was Prince of Persia, Sands of Time, very vocally talked about how they use lighting to kind of guide the player through levels. And that's just become an accepted piece of wisdom among game designers of, we'll use lighting to kind of direct the player's eye and do all this. And that stuff can have a 5 to 10% difference, but it's not the super magic trick that just solves every problem, and probably wasn't the reason that worked in Prince of Persia, Sands of Time. It probably worked for a billion other reasons.
There's
this kind of thing. Sorry, go on.
No, you go ahead. I cut you off.
Oh no, it's cool. I was going to ramble anyway. Go for it.
Stop fighting.
I don't like it when you
Very
fight.
polite. The tweet recently, a player made a complaint, an audience member, something that doesn't work in dev, about yellow lines on boxes and stuff. I think it might have been in reference to Resident Evil 4 Remake of like, why do we still need this? Like, this is so outdated. Why do we need these like yellow bits of tape or yellow lines? And it's the same thing. It's just, how would you ever differentiate what you can interact with and what you can't unless there's a bright, obvious color on it, because you will miss most things. The yellow tape to break a box is super important.
That's a meeting you have super early on. Like we've had that on like future projects we're working on. Like, okay, what's the are we putting yellow on this? Are we doing this? Like, what's the visual cue we're doing that kind of ties all this together? And then when you don't do that, and like I said, I feel like this is every mid-level experienced game designer goes through this process where they go, oh, we don't need to teach the player that. The player's going to intuit that. The player's going to understand. They'll look for stuff. And every single time they smash into a brick wall. And the game designers who like grow and become better accept that and work out ways to kind of work around that limitation.
We've got a lot of brick walls too. Like, I was thinking recently, I'm having a conversation with somebody about this. Diablo. I'm very interested in the story for D4. And I was like, as a writer, the challenge of writing when you can't, outside of cutscenes, see anyone's faces. It seems like for a game like that they've clearly like gone with this darker, grittier story where they definitely want you to be engaged with the story. It came across that way in the beta. When you can't steal somebody's attention by showing them facial expressions, because that's not how Diablo works, writing forcibly has to be much, much briefer. Like, you have to have, and the way the text shows up on screen as well, you have to have less dialogue, so thus much more meaningful dialogue, or you'll just lose people 100% of the time, especially in a game that's very loot heavy, where they're just going to click to get things in their inventory. Even players going in with the intention of experiencing the story are probably going to ignore it because they aren't seeing a visual face to engage with while the story is being told. It was like, what a unique challenge that I'm really excited to see how they tackle in D4, because like any human you talk to, you're less engaged if you're not looking them in the face. That still applies to video game storytelling. I have no idea how they're going to do it.
It's tricky, yeah. I think you have
How'd
to meet
you do
the
with
player
a bunch of cubes or whatever, Mike?
I was going to say, like, literally whenever this argument happens online, someone says Thomas was alone. I'm not going to say Thomas was alone because I'm going to rise above. But then your point stands because Thomas was alone. Yeah, I'm proud of the writing, and I mean the writing's good, but it's Danny Wallace's voice that really pulled, like, emotionally, that's what you connect with, which is the same kind of thing as what we were talking about with the face. Like, there's a human element in the presentation. But yeah, no, it's definitely something we talk about a lot, especially like because we've done, obviously, when we're doing like with Tron Identity or with any of our other visual novels, like, you're just reading that text, so I have you. You're a captive audience. I can write about how the brittle rain is cold and interesting. I can go off on one. I can
Brittle
be
rain.
florid, but I can't in like a piece of text you see fly across the screen when you're playing one of our more action-focused games or one of our more it's all about. It's knowing the genre you're in and knowing kind of what the audience is actually doing. It's why there's so many great writers who are brilliant at writing like item descriptions and telling a story. Like, look at how Dark Souls conveys its story. Like, you're absolutely right. Those are the interesting challenges. Like, where do you... And we do that. Like, Solitaire Conspiracy was an exercise. And okay, how do we do a story in a solitaire game? And partially it was FMV, but then there's also a lot of story embedded elsewhere in that game. And I think, I'm drawn. That's why one of the reasons we jump genre is I'm always drawn to, like, how the fuck do you tell a story in this genre? That's interesting.
It's a very exciting part about video games.
To the point that you made a second ago about the kind of iteration on how to guide the player and how to make things, we had a version of that has been very interesting on Stray Gods, where we were writing the songs before we ever had them in engine, and we could basically just test them by manually creating audio edits in order to kind of give a sense of it, right? Just like place all the bits together in Pro Tools or whatever and just see how it plays. And test it, brute force. And then what happens is, like, okay, here's a choice. We want the player to choose one of these three emotional responses. And then over time, we refined things like, how long does the player have to make that choice? And what we discovered was that became one of the interesting challenges was that in order for it to feel very seamless, the music has to always kind of flow directly into the next thing. So it sounds like a musical number and there aren't these gaps. Well, the big challenge became, this is not a game there's no puzzle solving or like difficulty to this, but yet a difficulty, an emergent difficulty of like, oh, I just didn't see that thing that was sparkling or whatever. Our version of that kind of problem was that the moment the decision tree appears and you have, say, 10 or seconds, the music keeps going. And the problem is we were initially writing the songs where it was still very much feeding you information. The moment your eye goes to, okay, I have 3 things to choose from, you kind of can't fully listen to the lyrics. And if the lyrics are super dense and full of information, you're now split trying to read your response while still taking in new information, which means that it's like in this...
And on a timer, right? So you're applying that pressure.
It's stressful.
Very much.
Yeah.
It was in our mind. It was almost like we had gotten into this trap where the timer could fully run out, and in the nanosecond before it ran out, but wherein now you have fully completed the outgoing information, you can then make an educated choice on what you want to do next. And so we realized we had to build a kind of slope in the lyrics so that over the last 10 seconds, they were often restating the point, or they were kind of just getting a little less dense.
Tilt the ground up in the place where you want the player to go and jump, but done in songwriting.
Was that a playtesting problem you found, or was that like just through you guys playing?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, well, but it's that. It was internal play. This was years ago. This was well before we were showing it to anyone on the outside. But even just internally as a team, there'd be like the art director or somebody who hadn't heard the songs, so we're writing them. We put them in front, and the feedback came back immediately in blaring lights. You know, like when I listened to it in isolation, I realized I would make a different choice than when I'm having to make it on the fly, because I was getting new information right up until the last second, and that, you know, would have changed my opinion. So it required us to, you know, do some revision to address that.
That's really interesting.
Even then, there's still probably a few in there that, like, someone would be sort of do well to delay. It was one of those, anyway, it's for a game that's not hard, that has zero challenge whatsoever. There was a thing that resembled a stumbling block for players that we hit on early on that without the playtesting we would never have.
How did you decide?
It wouldn't have occurred to us
how long people would have to make a choice, because when you're playing a song that's giving them information, and then you have to transition into another song and I guess mix between genres seamlessly somehow, that amount of time is very important. Is it the same for every song? Or did you...
Yeah, the goal, I can't remember the exact, if it was 10 seconds or 15 seconds. It's funny, I've played it so many times.
You're not going to count while you play it.
At least... Yeah, well, we tuned it so much that I actually can't remember how long it's lasted, but it's usually about 10 seconds. And once we kind of realized what we were doing, you know, it took writing a few songs before we really felt like we kind of had this worked out. We started color coding the lyrics, where we would turn the lyrics pink from this point forward in the lyrics. We expect the choice hub to be on screen, so that you had a sense of, while you're writing, that the player's not just listening, but they're reading things as a response to what they're listening to, all in real time. And that helped visually clock, like, okay, you know, let's really make sure that if there's something that we think the distraction of this hub is going to take away from, it's before that, say, 10-second window.
I love hearing about these kinds of problems, because it's stuff that players never really think about, like that I wouldn't think about when playing that game if you hadn't told me. It's the tiny things become huge problems. Tested,
every player, like, the game would have been probably demolished. Who knows what will end up happening? Hopefully it's not.
People have been playing the demo,
but like in reviews and stuff. We had great, I mean, the tweets and stuff from people where they're like, I played this like 28 times in a row, and Jesus, it keeps changing. I was like, you know, couldn't pay people to write that kind of responses. Exactly.
But you did, all of them.
Yes, I did pay. I contacted every single Twitter user. But no, it was if we hadn't play tested that and we just kind of assumed it would work somehow and just very cluelessly somehow managed to ship the game that way, then I can't imagine it wouldn't have been a tidal wave of immediate feedback going, this is fucking frustrating. That, you know, I feel like I'm being bullied and I don't really know what's the sort of what I'm reacting to, and like, I hate it. And they would have probably been quite justified to feel that way.
Yeah.
It's wild, like, genuinely, like, because what you're saying is illustrated as well by how quickly a patch can fix a game. Like, we've had it on several games where, like, we had Volume come out, which had our checkpoints system wasn't great, and we got dinged in every review for it. And we took 3 days, I think, just to tweak how that worked, put that up, and all of our Steam reviews shot up, and the noise from that point. And you do kick yourself in that moment, like, if we just done that before we sent out the review keys, we would have a higher Metacritic on that game, or whatever.
Yeah, and that's not one that you can email about. Like, when I was reviewing games, I sometimes, if a game had a very big flaw, I would email the publisher and be like, "Hey, is this going to be fixed in the next 2 weeks?"
That's the one.
Oh, they did.
That's the only time one of our games we've ever had that reaction.
Because it happens when it's an outlier.
Going, is there a bug?
Yeah, when everything's very good except that one thing is when you're like, I got to ask them to fix it.
There wasn't time. We didn't have the time. It was like when we got those messages, basically, it was so close to release, and plus, there's lead times on like console and stuff and all this stuff. We didn't have time.
How complicated is a checkpoint system? I have no idea.
That is definitely one of those, how long's a piece of string? It depends. It depends on what you're saving. Weirdly, we're working on some save system stuff internally right now, so I'm watching the programmers have these exact challenges. It basically really does come down to how much are you trying to save and how often are you trying to save it. And then you're dealing with hardware, you're dealing with platform limitations on that, you're dealing with how often you want to have the little spinny thing in the corner that tells people that they're saving. It comes down to complexity. So with a simple checkpoint system of like, the player is in this position and these are the values they have in terms of like their health and the items they have and everything, that stuff's easy. I would love to know the complexity of, say, a save system in something like the new Zelda, where it's like, what are you saving? Like, every time they checkpoint, you're saving potentially like their inventions, the stuff they've put together, the objects in the world, where all the enemies are that they haven't killed.
I think it doesn't save what you make, but I don't remember. I'm actually like, I can't wait till we get some of the data on that, of like what gets saved and where, and what the limits are. I'm sure people have found that, and I just haven't looked into it because I did some digging into some cool creations, and then unfortunately saw some cool stuff that I was like, oh, I didn't want to see that yet, so I had to stop looking. But I'm sure there's some really interesting points about how many things you can ultra hand together, because I don't know what that limit is.
Save systems are one of those things where there are like what would sound to the layman. I think some of this is behind NDA, so I won't say much about it, but like the limits on like how much you can save on console, where you can save it, how often you can save, like those things, there are lots of constraints on, because basically it's one of those things where you're reaching out of the game code into the API, into the actual kind of the back end of whichever console.
You have to remind the player you exist as well. Like, it takes them out of the video game.
But just technically, there's just there's a lot of limitations on what you can and can't save and when you can save it.
I guess that's why they've gotten better.
Yeah, no, 100%. No, it's all, and that all those limitations I'm talking about make the player's experience better, like 100%. Like, that's why they're there. It's not the platforms being awful to us. They are absolutely making sure that your saves are quick and infrequent enough that they're not annoying and all this stuff. But there is it's a whole heap of things.
I have a question that's semi-related to that. But when I am playing a game and it crashes, especially if it's like an Unreal game and you get that Unreal splash screen that is asking you to potentially send your crash report, is that a thing that is coming to you eventually on the dev side? Are you getting like some kind of data aggregate on it? We saw this many of this crash type, this many of this crash type. Are you able to... how much does that influence a patching process where you're going?
Those who use it massively, yeah. So there's middlewares for this we've looked into in the past. It just
always feels like you're screaming into the wind. It's like if my game is not working, it's not like me sending that is going to fix it.
I think
it's more this
100% does.
It's helpful. It's a statistical.
Well, but not 1-to-1. It's like I'm contributing to the long-term
You're
solution.
voting. You'll vote.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're not. It's not. So it's not an incremental improvement. But basically problems are solved in order of how important they are, how many people are getting run. Yeah, how many. What the frequency is. So you're voting basically every time you do that. You're saying this is an issue. It's a real issue and it affects me. And basically, the developer will get all that information, but they get it in aggregate. So they're not getting like, oh, Austin's got a problem, everyone, sit down, we've got to work on this. It's much more kind of, it's getting tallied up.
Can I register to be like a power user so they investigate my machine specifically and they patch me immediately?
EA has those.
I bet there are major game studios who 100% know, like, here's the 100 biggest streamers, like PlayStation handles or whatever, and we're going to fix issues that come up. I bet it is. I don't know if it is, but I bet it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're like, and that's a vote, and then that goes in and they fix it. And then, well, the other good thing with those systems is they have your data, so they have kind of a crash report.
That's not a sentence we often hear. The good news is with that, they have data,
your gameplay data, which they will legally be able to collect, which will basically just be the state of the game when it crashed, because games are constantly talking. Like, what players don't see is under the hood, you've got a bunch of logging going on, basically, where the game is constantly just writing a diary of, so Austin went up to the edge of this thing, and then he did this, and then that's happened, and then that's, and that, I know everyone in this room knows this, but I'm speaking past you to the audience. Like, there's this log that's happening, and that's the thing that gets sent over, and yeah.
I actually think it's so cool when we do our internal playtests and mine crashes, and one of the engineers will message me and say, would you mind screen sharing really quick, and I can poke through your crash log or whatever, or send me the text file. And I love watching them go through, and they'll find, like, on line 723, they'll realize, oh, it was calling two textures in the same place at the same time for some reason, and that made it lose its mind, and it crashed, and we can figure. And there's something very Sherlock Holmesian about watching a great programmer
100%.
suss through, like, that one line of code is where or that one line of output of, like, crash.
I was talking to someone the other day, and I said one of the
several days to fix. Like, watching people be like, what the fuck was this?
Exactly. But the one thing, I was saying this to someone the other day, the one weirdest skill that you notice with coders who've been coders for a while is we're all really good at estimation. Not like guessing, not like estimation like in a way that would ever be useful for any real purpose, but basically whether something looks right number wise. Does that, if a dog walked across a park, how many steps would the dog take? Well, it's going to be somewhere in the range of X, because that's the big skill. When you're looking at log, it never says like, and then Austin did this that broke this, but it might say, Austin's character picked up 200 arrows, and it's like, no, there's no reason that character could pick up 200 arrows there. So like, there's a skill with debugging, with finding these errors of like, what's a reasonable number? What's a reasonable situation? It's a weird life skill, because you find yourself using that in day-to-day life of like, oh, I've missed the bus. Well, reasonably, probably there were this distance from here. Like, you just start estimating it's a strange thing.
It's a huge thing in QA too it's a thing about whenever conversations about QA come up that's started to frustrate me is you can be good at QA, and QA doesn't have to be an entry-level position, and we always treat it like, oh, well, you do QA until you get a real game dev job. Like, no, people can be incredible at QA for that same reason. They're very good at, like, drawing logical conclusions about what caused the problem and how to fix the problem. And it's odd that we don't treat it like it's a career.
We've had the same QA person for years and years and years, and it's because she is just a monster at, like, working out whether something logically makes sense. It's an absolute gift.
I think the
are we doing the RQA's game developers debate again?
They are.
Have we come to that point in the cycle
again? We're not
they absolutely are.
They are, but writers aren't.
But is that discourse bubbling up again? Because it feels like it bubbles up every couple of years.
No.
Okay, good.
Another fun game dev thing that I saw this week was somebody looked at statistics for how many players turn on subtitles. Can I, Austin, guess, how many people do you think turn on subtitles in video games?
It's probably way more than I would have ever guessed, like 50% or something.
Mike?
So I know the Netflix number is like 25 to 30, so I'm going to guess like 25, 30?
95.
What?
Really?
95.
Huh.
Isn't that insane?
That has to be some, like, is that... They can't. Is that?
I play with subtitles.
Was this like on?
Let me see
like
if I can
Steam users,
find
or
it. So it was
or is this supposed to be?
It was a specific list of games that they found the data for. 95% subtitles is probably the easiest way.
I know it's been a big thing in streaming services. Have had to invest a lot in streaming, in
I turn
subtitles because
on everything.
But it's a sound mix issue, because most audio now is mixed for beautiful surround sound perfection. if you're watching it on any other context, which is where most people are watching stuff, then there is the voices are usually too quiet or muffled or whatever.
Right.
So most people, so a lot of people watch it.
Well, and
So
also
the-
mixes
I wonder
are
if it's the
done
same in
dynamically in games.
Because that's
Like,
why I use them in
right.
games, is because exactly that. Like, if the guy's too far away
Right.
from me, it's going to be too quiet, so I'm going to miss it.
Yeah. So it was from Ian Hamilton, who's an accessibility specialist. It was Sniper Elite 5 was 95%, and so then he shared a couple more games. Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga 95%, Assassin's Creed Odyssey 95%, Far Cry New Dawn 97%, Guardians of the Galaxy 97%. And then he also said you cannot afford to have subpar title presentation or content, don't let them be an afterthought. And that's totally true, and also subtitles are way harder than I think a lot of people think they are.
So fucking hard, yeah.
They were really careful with that. That was a big thing for the accessibility team for Ragnarok 2, is like, make sure that you have several options for how people want them to be presented. Do you want them to have a high contrast? Do you want them to be blurred in the background? What does it look like when you're over the top of
It's been amazing seeing
snow?
those options the last few years.
There's a key detail in what Alanah just said, which is accessibility team. That should give people an idea of how big these jobs are. Like, that you need like a focused team doing that.
Yeah, well,
I have
part
to
of the
run.
accessibility
Sorry
team-
to be sudden about it. I just realized the time. I have a
yes.
meeting. So
Good day,
enjoy,
sir.
carry on.
Thank you.
I look forward to you shifting to all the
Austin
music
hates
and Jerry
accessibility,
Goldsmith topics
so
starting
he's out.
right now.
Austin's like,
one of
why
those.
do they bother? Austin's like, it ruins my
He said,
vision.
"Just get
And
good."
I'm like, exactly.
Yeah, I
he's
think
like,
you should just get
people
good,
should
learn
just
to
listen
code.
to the music.
I'm really all for.
He's very, very anti-accessibility,
Yeah,
Austin.
it's
That's
a
the key
bummer.
takeaway from this episode.
PC Master Race, all of it. I honestly, this whole thing is very diminutive, and so I leave you to it.
All right, bye. I think the thing with having an accessibility team, which obviously I do think everybody should have, or at least consultants, is that you have people reminding you all the time that you need to think about something. Because obviously when you're making a game, you're doing it very quickly. Decisions are being made very quickly. So if you don't have multiple people being like, what is this for accessibility? This is going to be an accessibility problem. Probably one in every department is necessary to actually be properly efficient. People just aren't going to think of it. And I think we're getting there. It's getting a lot better, actually. I think Ubisoft's really consistently doing a great job with accessibility of the AAA publishers. They're doing a really fantastic job. It's getting better across the board. Global Accessibility Day was, I think, last week, maybe the week before, and people shared some updates. I would really love to see more studios announce what their accessibility options are going to be ahead of time going forward, like a mini E3 type
That's
thing.
the big
That'd be
one that
really
people
nice.
are asking for now, isn't it? Is that awareness up front, which makes sense from
Yeah,
like a purchasing decision.
I'll be
point of
bringing
view.
back
It
the
makes absolute
accessibility
sense.
awards next year. I didn't this year because ethically it seemed like a bad idea with Ragnarok. Not just that I knew that it would be nominated / probably win, but also that that's the thing that I directly worked on the most. It seemed like a bad idea. So I was like, let's just skip this year. So I'll bring it back next year. And I was going to try and reach out to dev teams and be like, if you have any accessibility announcements, we could include them in the show and make that a bigger thing. Hopefully.
Oh, like Keely it basically, like have the
Accessibility
announcements
show, yeah.
in amongst the awards.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, in terms of like doing the announcements as part of it. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it would be effort because it's hard to get people to stay engaged with accessibility. So that's why, like, the show has such a comedy lean to it, is that I try to make it really funny and entertaining. So we would probably want to talk to those teams about making sure that they try to make... So it can't be a presentation. or most people will be like, I don't care about this, which is unfortunate because if it doesn't pertain to them. And I mean, I want to reframe the way we look at accessibility entirely to be optimization or customization. It should be a customization because accessibility, people are like, well, I don't have any need for more access to the thing.
That's the fundamental problem, isn't it, with games as a medium, is we emphasize youth so much, which correlates obviously with accessibility and the idea of like people playing either think of themselves as young or are actually young, and the reality is it's the old thing that lots of people say of like you're just temporarily able,
Yes.
like in terms of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's all going to be useful for you eventually, and as you know, as someone of a certain age, I'm starting to realize that on lots of levels, and it's kind of
Of a certain age.
it of a certain age. It's and I think that's a tough message to in games where we're constantly like showing that whoever the new famous 20-somethings who are playing games on Twitch are, like, it's a hard message to kind of. I think you're right, like going for the comedy of it, going for the humor, going for the kind of, and I think the inventiveness as well. Like, I bet there's marketing teams out there, specific game publishers and developers who would genuinely like be able to have a really good time.
You could so easily reframe it as and have a good time with it as customization. Play however you want. Remap whatever buttons you want. Make puzzles however you want them, because that's what it is. When you play a game and you go in the settings menu, you change brightness. Technically, that's accessibility. It's based on your own vision. It's making sure it's accessible to you in your living room with your TV. We just haven't framed the word that way. I would like accessibility menus to eventually just be part of the menu and have it be customization. So everyone's like, oh, I should look at this. I will like this game more because I can do whatever I want with it. Anything I can remap buttons, I'm a fan of.
We've got better with that on lots of levels, like individually. So, like, difficulty, I think's better at explaining that now than it was. But like I think there's also just opening up the communication and making. I think this is something you're really good at, and obviously you're putting a focus on. But like making it not feel like a staid, charitable. Like, it's not like I think people are very cautious about their words and about the way they communicate about this stuff, because they don't want to offend anyone or be insulting or rude to the audience. And I think actually loosening that up, making it more comfortable for people to talk about as well, which what you're doing is a big part of, I think just makes that conversation a lot easier and a lot more straightforward, and it makes people feel more comfortable talking about it.
It still has an us versus them thing, and you're right, people, like, bless people who are trying not to offend people. It's a very kind thing to do. But if you favor not talking about it, that seems worse. Like, if you're like, let's just not touch it.
That's what I'm saying is opening the doors kind of helps. And there'll always be arseholes on the internet who want to make it about
really?
Get good. So? And that's fine. I think there will be.
Really?
But we can kind of talk over them a bit, I think. And the more people talking, the louder the talking over them is.
So with
I think what you're doing is great on this.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So with this and our previous conversation in mind, what's the solution to aging players dramatically overthinking the difficulty of puzzles? I don't know what that design meeting looks like, and I suspect that the answer most people come up with when talking about this is we just let them overthink it, because I don't know that there's been a game that's tackled that, and if they have, they've done it so well that you can't tell.
I think the design. I think there's a design solution, and I think there's a trend that's going to continue. So the design solution right now, I think it's all about, when I'm designing puzzle stuff, when I'm working with my team on these kind of problems, it's about defining the play space. I don't mean physically, but from a design perspective, what are the verbs the player has? How do we communicate to them which verbs we want them to use in this situation?
And without being so explicit that it removes creativity. They need to think there's more than one option, I would think. At least for Tears of the Kingdom, you would need to think there's multiple options.
And that's the next layer. So I would say the design solution I just said is for like puzzles where there isn't, where it's like a Resident Evil style puzzle back in the day, where it's like, no, you have to move all the things into the right places exactly as the designer planned.
If someone's failing at overthinking that's a design problem, 100%.
That's a design problem. In terms of the overthinking, I think New Zelda kind of is a part of this trend. I genuinely think we may look back in a decade on like the strict kind of puzzle design as something that was like that's now massively outdated. I think it's one of those things where basically creating interesting challenges and then giving the player the tools to figure out their own solution to that challenge, I think has always been something we're moving towards as an industry. And I think right now we're too close to it that we can't see that transition necessarily. But if you look at like games from 10, 20 years ago, they were much more, work out what the designer was thinking. And I feel like on the whole, we're broadly moving away from that, either with kind of puzzle games that are about kind of creative solutions, like figuring out like your own, there's a million ways of doing it, you just have to be clever enough to come up with one of them. Or in the case of a lot of like AAA stuff, like just removing puzzles altogether. Like it's just not going to be a part of the conversation with our game. I feel like the kind of the find the right answer style puzzle design, I think, is going to continue to go out of fashion to the extent where it feels very old fashioned, in a decade or so.
I guess it is pretty restrictive, and I'll always say the coolest thing about video games is the fact that someone's playing it. Like, as cheesy as that is, that's the coolest part, is that somebody is controlling that world, right? Like, they're doing everything, and realistically, the taking advantage of the medium and not just being like, let's put a puzzle in there so that they're not bored option is probably more flexibility in puzzle design. Which, yeah, Zelda is doing a great job of. Like, it's the only game I can think of, maybe outside of sometimes in Minecraft, where when I've solved something, I am laughing at the insane thing that worked and being like, oh, I wonder, will this be a weight problem? Is this going to work? Just being fascinated by how the physics work and how good their physics system is. Like, it makes it delightful because you feel like you have ownership over everything you're doing. I think Elden Ring, similarly, people really like because giving you that big open world in a FromSoft game and being like, figure it out, kid, makes you feel like a genius when you figure anything out, even though it was all there and all put there, and obviously games are designed to be finished. It just makes you feel so smart. I think I feel kind of similarly about games like The Witness, where there's no order in the way you have to solve puzzles and no tutorial. It's just figure it out, have fun. And then it just makes you feel so smart when you actually figure it out. And I think that
I think that's where we're going.
Yeah.
And I think with even with something like The Witness, there's definitely like right answers. I think we're going to move away from that. I think we're moving towards giving the player a goal and some tools to get there. And I think that's eventual. I think either we're going to end up with, I think we'll have both. We'll probably continue down the path with like your AAA kind of with apologies, Sony first party kind of design school of like,
I call them blockbuster.
Razzmatazz, basically, like just let's make it an amazing, beautiful story, beautiful world, whatever, but kind of keep you on a relatively confined track. And then we're also going to go down the kind of Zelda kind of make your own fun kind of road. I think that arguably, it's nothing new. Minecraft was doing it, a decade ago. But I think the audience, if you look at what people are playing, it tends to, it's going down those paths rather than the, here's what I had in mind, go work out what I, the cleverest level designer in the world, have come up with.
I mean, Fortnite was that. They were like, what if you can make your own defenses? And then people just started building crazy stuff. I always feel like
everyone's a creator now.
Yeah. I mean, in Roblox, you're literally designing your own games. I really don't know enough about it for how much money it makes and how popular it is. Like, I'm like, I should just play Roblox at some
None
point.
of us do. That's the problem. No. Like, whenever I meet anyone from the Roblox team, it's always this thing of, I know that basically your game is bigger than the industry I'm in.
It's its own industry.
Kind of strange.
Roblox is its own games industry. They make so much money for something that none of us talk about. I have one friend who is a Roblox YouTuber, and I had messaged him before, and I was like, could you just one day just teach me what Roblox is? Because I just feel like I'm missing out. I get Minecraft and I get Fortnite. I don't know what the fuck's going on with Roblox. Like,
this is the circle of life that
it's true.
This is fine.
But I think it's the same thing.
This is why we're not on the drop down for advertising anymore. I'm not on the drop down for advertising
I'm still
anymore.
there for another.
You're still
6
there. You're clinging
years.
into that bracket. But no, I think that's where I think it's going, and I think that's exciting, but I also think that is something that I try and think about when I'm designing games. Now, I'm not trying to come up with, so like Volume, for example, because I mentioned it earlier, was very much there were puzzles in that game where you had to just work out there's lots of puzzles in that game where you had to just work out the winning strategy and do it. And definitely now when we're talking about our games, we're talking about like playing pieces. We're talking about Lego sets. We're not necessarily talking about literally like creating objects or doing that, but in terms of how mechanics come together, in terms of how sandboxes come together, like it's how that stuff, we're not going, oh, well, we know the player's going to do X, Y, Z here. It's more, this is a situation we're going to put the player in, and then there's a few different ways they can kind of deal with that
so
situation.
Hard to play test for. But I did go and check one of the early puzzles in Tears of the Kingdom is you have a minecart and you have a railing. It's just like two, like a railroad. And it goes over and connects two mountains. So it's just two pieces of railing, nothing underneath. And the one on the right is broken. So if you just put the minecart on it and you make something push it, it will fall off. The different ways people solved that, I think I might have seen 10. There were probably 4 that I could have been like, you could probably do this, you probably do this, you probably do this. The most obvious one is there's like a hook nearby, and you can put it on top of the minecart, and then you can sit in it, and you put it just over the left railing with the hook on top, so it's like dangling down. But the amount of different things people did to get through that, I saw somebody make a train, so they got several minecarts together. That one I was like, well, that makes sense. But there were so many of them that I was like, I never even would have considered that was possible.
And that's the baffling thing, right? That Nintendo, like, it's easy to make a physics engine. It's easy, like, relatively easy to make a physics engine. But making one that can withstand so much and not, like, crap out. Most physics in games, like, you know, can bug out very easily.
I saw a single physics bugging this out, but
I
just had a bug. I just says physics bugs. I don't think that, like, I just had a bug, and I don't think they have any physics bugs. It's like they're so it has bugs and frame rate drops. It has problems in other places, but the physics, like, I've not seen a single thing
that's impressive
operate correctly.
And to be fair, that's how you playtest a game like this. They probably, if they knew there were lots of solutions, things, I'm sure they playtested the whole game through and checked to see that, like, that people weren't getting particularly stuck in any one thing and people find their own. But there was probably a lot of player testing just to see what people tried, just to try and get inside the heads of how people problem solve generally.
Like, I wonder if they've seen... Well, no, they must have seen solutions that they didn't even try.
Oh, 100%.
For sure, they're probably seeing stuff.
And then those probably created physics bugs, and then that's where your QA process comes in and kind of finds those. It's a fascinating one. It's definitely on my list of games to, like, in a bar with some folks from Nintendo at some point, just like, okay, how the hell, like, did you actually get that?
It's very
across?
impressive.
And I think I saw someone quoting, who was it? Someone senior on the team who was saying, like, they finished the game a year ago. This was a year of, like, just polish and QA just to get things as tidy as that. I believe that. Like, I believe that you would have to do that with a game like this. Yeah, it's amazing.
Definitely.
Really impressive.
Yeah, it's very cool. I really feel like we've gotten some pretty cool games this year. And obviously a new Zelda game is always a blockbuster. I think it's 95 on Metacritic, highest reviewed Zelda game of all time.
Of course,
Millions.
It always is. I
think
they're going to have to work out more numbers.
Yeah, I don't think you can give Zelda not a 10. Like, it's all. I think I said that before it came out. I was like, it'll get a 10. Of course it will.
Sure.
Which is so interesting, especially for a franchise that's both so formative for so many other games, had such an impact on the industry and on so many developers, but at the same time has transformed in of its own franchise. Like, it's both formative for everybody, and there's all these game dev memes right now of people being like, when you enter a meeting on Monday and everyone's like, so I've been playing Zelda, and then they just pitch ideas. It's still doing that. Like, there's a fresh one that's just come out that did not stick to the structure that it easily could have, that they invented forever ago, and is still generating ideas with an entirely different team. Obviously, same leadership, literally same director, but otherwise, you'd have to think most people who worked on early Zelda have moved on or died. It's super impressive. I wonder if they have just, like, an incredible design ethos, or like a manual of some kind, or like something that's kept the quality so high.
I mean, Nintendo in general just has incredible design.
Their first party games are
approaches,
so good.
and they're fascinating when you have, like, work conversations with them, because obviously we've done some stuff with Nintendo over the years, and, like, when they play builds or when they check stuff out, like, Nintendo feedback is insanely good. Like, it's like, it's in depth. Like, it's definitely in depth, but, like, it's just they genuinely think about game design at a level that I just don't think any of the rest of us do. Like, it's incredible to me.
I wonder how that happened. It's super interesting.
A lot of it is our friend Oscar Water. Iwata back in the day, like, and Miyamoto. There's a whole culture that was established at Nintendo of humility in the face of the enormity of game design, and it's a very respectful approach to, like, the field that they're geniuses because they don't think of themselves as geniuses. I think that's a big part of it.
Sure.
There's an awe and wonder towards the stuff, which I think also shines through in the games. There is all the Nintendo games have that kind of awe for the franchise, for the concept of games. Like there's just it feels like they're constantly rediscovering them along with the audience. I think
right? Pokemon's in a tough spot, where the last few Pokemon releases have been both buggy. I mean, Scarlet and Violet, definitely the buggiest first-party Nintendo games I've ever played. Buggy and just poor graphical performance, which is an odd one because I know it's like Pokemon's the highest-grossing franchise of ever of all time, higher than Star Wars. It's incredible. I think it's maybe just the team at Game Freak is a little bit too small, and they release multiple games a year, and I think it's only like 100 people. And I'd love to see that change, but same token, it doesn't necessarily need to change because they keep selling so well, which sucks. But I feel like where it comes to Mario and Zelda, I do not remember the last time I saw a bug in either of those franchises, which is so nuts, especially because they've been around for so long. It's my whole life. And they're still outselling everyone.
I think they're very good at innovating in the right areas in terms of like, you don't get the sense that Nintendo first party are like, they're not pushing for like graphical fidelity or world size. I mean,
Nintendo's very innovative though. I definitely think they care about that. Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying is they're innovative in the right areas. They're innovative in the gameplay. They're innovative in the areas that make
creativity
sense from. But creativity is relatively cheap from a QA process. Like that's the thing that I'm pointing out. Like I think you can maintain stability and high quality of product with big swings creatively if you're not trying to do all those other things as well. I think they've found that right balance. It's it's resourcefulness, I guess.
Resourcefulness, I think, probably works very well for Tears of the Kingdom because I don't think they would have had a lot of scope issues with that game. They build the physics engine, they figure out the abilities, and a lot of the abilities came through actually they were debug modes that they were like, what if we didn't make that debug? What if we just made that an ability? Ascend was definitely a debug, which basically just lets you. It's such a weird mechanic.
That's when you point at the ceiling, right?
Yep.
Is that what it is?
And you can just go through any ceiling. Again,
debug
such
tools,
a weird
like
mechanic.
Seriously, look at photo mode. Like debug tools have become of such an amazing source for good game design.
And don't cause scope issues.
You're the person, and don't cause scope.
Yeah.
Well, polish causes scope on those, but it's polish, right? Which is its own thing.
Yes, which is still less of a scope problem. Like I feel like Tears of the Kingdom, this is just guessing, and I'd have to think about this harder. Probably didn't face a ton of scope issues outside of how many shrines do we have. Or how big is this dungeon? I think as
well, like you might be really onto something with this because there's I mean you're onto many, obviously you're always onto it, but
hey,
like, this particular I think you're very welcome. But I think like there's a really good programmer I've worked with, one of the best programmers I've ever worked with. Basically his kind of mantra was that the game designers work for the player and I work for the game designers. And it was kind of basically like, I'm here, I'm not making this code for the player. I'm making this code to make the designer able to make the experience they're making for the player.
Sure.
And I think with him as well, that kind of played into like the tools he created internally and the way he kind of empowered the designers around him. And I think what you're saying here with like, the use of debug tools and stuff, like the tools designers use, they are obviously the people who've played the game the most. They're playing for thousands of hours while making stuff and working on it. So looking to what they need and what they're using and what makes their experience playful and joyful with the game world and going, is there something here we can hand to the player? It's a very natural and smart.
It's very smart.
That's a clever idea. That's a good idea for them to have.
Like, seems like nobody's really thought of it before. Like, I'd be interested to do some research into how many things that were just debug tools that ended up becoming mechanics. Like you said, photo mode is obviously a great one.
That's the one I think opened a lot of people's eyes wide. God mode, definitely God mode.
I just found out Tunic again. I finished that game. I did the final puzzle. It's one of the goddamn best gaming experiences of my life. This is the first time in a really long time that when I finished something, I went and watched a bunch of YouTube videos just because I wanted to hear other people gush about Tunic. After finishing it, I found out, I tweeted about it, that there's one more puzzle that I hadn't done because I didn't even know it existed. That is the hardest thing on the planet. I think maybe I'll try it. I'm like, I don't want to cheat it. It would be pointless. I have to try it. It's like hidden in this room that I only went in one time, and it only reveals itself in that room after you have a certain amount of things, and I only had 2, whatever. The other one is that it has God mode. Some of those boss fights I was stuck on for forever. Like the final boss fight, which is optional, but I wanted to do it. I think it took me like 3 months of picking it up and putting it back down because it was so hard. A lot of people say they bounce off that game because it's really difficult. Like the boss fights are really, really hard. So they stop playing. Now you can be like, just go God mode. Apparently that was in the settings the whole time and I just had no fucking idea it was there. I'm kind of glad I didn't because, again, I think they're all really well designed as well. Some of my favorite boss fights. But it's like, damn, I could have just not done that.
You could have customized the experience to make it more fun for you, couldn't you?
Son of a bitch. All right, I have to get back to work, which is a weird thing to do when it's dark out, but here we are.
Oh, you're still working US time, while you?
Yeah, whole time. So it's like my last meeting ends at 2 a.m., I think. It's making it work.
I've done that from the other side.
I'm happy to be able to do it at all. Like, I prefer to not have to skip work and be able to go places than not. You know, it's awesome, but it is very weird to be working until 2 a.m. But here I am. All right, I'm Alanah.
You're an indie developer now.
Look at me go. That's Mike Bithell. He's a video game director. I'm a video game writer. Austin was here. He's a video game composer. Had to go to a composing meeting, probably. I don't know.
Probably talking about, should I play da-da-da-da-da, or should I play da-da-da-da-da?
I think that's what most of his
like
meetings
that,
are.
like,
Yeah. No, we
I think that's most of his meetings.
You can probably take them for him from now on, to be honest. Is it a bit higher on the end? And I think that's all he does, really.
I'll just turn around every 5 minutes and just play absolute gibberish on the piano.
That's all he does,
Well done, Mike. Yeah, that is the theme to X-Files. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
All right, we'll see you guys next time. Bye!